In example 7, it asks us to write the following statements in symbolic form. If the portrait is a pastel, then the portrait is by Beth Anderson. So again, similar to what we did before, first we need to know what the original statements are, and then we can link them together. So I've got a portrait being a pastel and a portrait being by Beth. So those will be our two original statements. So we'll start with P, and that's the portrait is a pastel. And then Q will be the portrait is by Beth. And now I can link these two together. So in part A, this is an if then, and so this is a conditional statement. It uses the arrow. It just says if the portrait is a pastel, then the portrait is by Beth. So we're going to start with the portrait being a pastel, which is P, and then we're going to go to the portrait being by Beth, which is Q. In part B, it's still an if then, so we still have the if and the then. This time it says if the portrait is by Beth, then the portrait is not a pastel. So now we have a negation as well. So order is important. So first we want to start with the portrait being by Beth, and so we're going to start with a Q this time. And then we're going to go to the not being a pastel. So we need the tilde, and then pastel is P. And then in part C it says it is false that. So we have a comma, and before we said that commas group things together, so everything on one side of the comma will be in parentheses, right? So that means that everything over here will be in parentheses. And then it is false that is a type of negation, and so this will be my tilde. So when I do this, if the portrait is by Beth, then the portrait is a pastel, still the conditional. Nothing is negated, but we've got Beth first and then pastel second, and we have the negation of the entire statement on the outside. So we're going to write it exactly like it looks. We'll put the tilde first, and then the parentheses, we're starting with Beth, which is Q, and we're going to the pastel, which is P, and then we will be done. So the big thing here is that that comma groups things together, right? So everything on one side will be in parentheses, since the more than one statement, right? The compound statement was to the right, that's what's in parentheses. We are negating that entire thing, so we have the negation in front. In example 8, now we have a biconditional. So again, the biconditional is if and only if. And because I don't want to write that many words, we can abbreviate that as just IFF. And so that's what I'm going to use when I write these symbols in words. So it tells us what P and Q are. It says P is that Alex plays goalie on the lacrosse team, and Q is the Huskies win the Champion Cup. And now we're going to link those together. So again, make sure you're careful with order, and then make sure that you look for any negations, parentheses, things like that. So the first one says to write the symbolic statements in words, and it has the P and then the biconditional, double arrow, and Q. And so this one would say P is Alex, right? So we're going to say Alex plays goalie on the lacrosse team. Lacrosse team. And then my biconditional, my if and only if, the Huskies win the Champions Cup. In part B, Now we're going to switch the order. We're going to do Q first, and then if and only if, not P, right? So we're going to start with the Huskies winning the Champions Cup, and then we'll do our if and only if, and this time it's not the case, right? So Alex does not play goalie on the lacrosse team. So for part B, again, we start with the Huskies winning. And then my biconditional, the if and only if. And this time we want Alex to not play goalie, right? So the Huskies win the Champions Cup if and only if Alex does not play goalie on the lacrosse team. So now we have a couple of negations. We also have a set of parentheses, which means that we should have a comma, right? So the first negation is the one on the outside, and so this was my it is false that, it is not the case that, it is not true that, right? Then I have my parentheses, which means I'll have a comma here, right? Then we have P, so that's Alex playing goalie. If and only if, not Q, so that would be the Huskies don't win the Champions Cup, right? So for this one, we're going to start with the negation on the outside, right? So it is false that, comma, Alex plays goalie on the lacrosse team. Then I have my double arrow, my biconditional, if and only if. This is the Huskies don't win, right? The Huskies do not win the Champions Cup. So again, be very careful. Negation on the outside of parentheses. That's going to be a negation of the entire statement coming after it. So we have it is false that, it is not true that, it is not the case that, something like that. That means that everything that comes after is not true, right? Then we have the comma to show that we are going to put everything after that in parentheses.